Stana asked Yura, Jesse T. Yura, where are you, Yura? And he replied, Ja sam tamo u onom vruću fabriku. I am in that hot foundry. Stana told on the many trips she made to the grocery store she would meet Yura Mochen's wife, Jana. They would often chat with one another. Jana at the time had 2 children, 2 daughters, and she asked Stana to come inside and see her daughters. Little did Stana realize then the role Jana and Yura would have a part in the future life of the Drakulic family. Stana told there was a bakery on Watkins Avenue that was owned and operated by Macedonians and Bulgarian men. She said in the summer evenings the men would all sing, and rather loudly too. She said sometimes she would get a little frightened by their voices, as she thought maybe their loud singing could be they were drunk and a fight might follow, but none of that occurred. She also told how a Serbian priest who was serving St. Nicholas Church at the time in Wummerding died. She went to his church services and said there were many priests who came to serve at the funeral service. She said she got shivers down her spine and told us she was sure their singing was going to awaken the dead priest. Yuban got to that age when he got acquainted with the kids in the neighborhood. One wintry day, he and some other boys were playing on the icy Turtle Creek there, behind Watkins Avenue. They thought the creek was frozen solid. One of the boys, an Italian, fell through the ice, and apparently some of the kids, including Yuban, tried in vain to rescue him. It was late in that evening that Yuban was quite wet and shivering when Stana found him outside crying. He told her what happened, and Stana said there were men with grappling hooks later searching the creek for the boy's body. The boy's last name was Marciano, and his sister Katie, years later, had a part in the life of Yura and Jana Mochen. Katie's daughter Louise married Paul Mochen, whose brother Michael married Stana and Luka's daughter Helen. Luka told his children that he and a couple of other Serbian men got together and decided to buy a butcher shop on Wall Avenue in Wall. Unfortunately, we cannot recall all the names of the partners except for one, whose name was Drakulic. Perhaps we may come upon someone who may have heard about this business from their parents and add their names to this story. Luka said the business failed, and debtors were about to make a claim on their business, and the men went to a lawyer for legal advice, and the lawyer told them if they had any money in the bank to put the bank account in 2 names, a joint account. Luka put his brother Juro's name on his account, so the debtors weren't able to touch Luka's account. As for the rest, I cannot say. Chris Hessler took over the butcher shop that they had bought and kept it going for many years. When he retired, his employee Chester Gleganic, who changed his name to Glenn, took it over and operated it up until probably the late 60s. It is not quite clear if the business partnership that Luka had concerning the butcher shop was before he and Jana got together. It may well have been before, because when he was house hunting, his bank account was a joint account with his brother, Juro. So this no doubt also may have been true that Juro was living with Luka and Jana when Luka bought our house from Charles Frank in 1918. Luka's Jana became very ill after the birth of his daughter Amelia. Apparently when they moved into the house on Valley Avenue, she was very ill and not able to climb the stairs. He told how happy she was when he bought the house. She asked him if he could pick her up out of her bed and carry her about through the house so she could see the rest of the house, but he said he was not able to do that. Luka had hired a woman whose name was Vaya Svijanovic, to take care of Jana and his daughter Milja and the house. Luka said Vaya was a good housekeeper and a caretaker up until some of the women in the neighborhood told her she was foolish to care for Jana because they believed she had a contagious disease. One day the woman came into the house to see Jana. They stood in the doorway of what today is the living room, but was Jana's bedroom. She said to them in Serbian, Bog vam da, jedna od vas da iščešlja mi kose. God grant to you, will one of you come and comb my hair? They refused her pious request. Ironically, each of them never lived to old age, and Luka said Jana's words came to mind when they died. Luka told how heartbreaking it was to watch her grow weaker each passing day after Milja was born. He told us how she would take his hand and kiss it and tell him over and over he was to her everything. She was by birth a Roman Catholic, but wanted to become an Orthodox Christian. Luka said she told him when she dies, he must not bury her up in the Grandview Cemetery, but down in the St. George Serbian Cemetery. He said to her, why should he do that when Ismakisport was close? She made him promise he would obey her wish and said, if you don't, I'll come back and haunt you. Perhaps because of their baby Ljuba was buried in the St. George Cemetery, she wanted to be next to her child. Luka said although she sought to be Orthodox, he saw her one day with a rosary in her hand, and when she lay in her casket, he placed a rosary in her hands. Luka's housekeeper gave him notice to look for someone to replace her, as she was planning on going back to the old country. Luka said when Jana became ill, he went out and bought a cow for milk to give Milja to replace the milk that her mother would have been giving her. He often laughed over this buying a cow for milk, for back then the doctors were telling mothers to use canned milk to feed babies, but he said he thought cow's milk was next best to the mother's breast milk. Vaya was serious in telling Luka to find a replacement, so somebody told him that Stana from his cello was working for Mr. Zoric, and he should try to get her to come and work for him. So one day he went to see her and asked her if she was willing to come and work for him. He offered more money than what Mr. Zoric was paying her, and she accepted. Stana said Ljuban was so excited to come and live in Wall. Luka sent a horse and cart to get their belongings. Ljuban was 7 years old when they moved to Wall. Milja was only 6 months old when Jana died in the month of April 1918. Her death certificate, signed by the doctor, whose name was Dr. Muth, gave the impression that she had TB, but Luka never gave his daughter to believe this. In fact, when Milja talked to him about her health, he led her to think and believe she was ill with arthritic pains. Whatever the cause, she became bedridden and unable to care for her newborn child. Luka said the neighborhood women were fearful of her sickness, but he said for all the care he gave her, he never contracted any TB. However, Luka's brother came down with TB one day and spent some time in a hospital in Crescent. Stana's new position as housekeeper and nanny was not easy, for Luka also had bought the cow to supply milk for Milja and for the household. Her work also included taking care of and milking the cow, and also all the chores that had to be done with the taking care of a cow and taking care of the house. Luka also had some chickens he kept. It seems the peasant life of old was still within him. Juro and brother Ljuban were boarding at the house also, and Stana got attached to Milja, and Milja got to be bonded with Stana. Stana said that Luka bought a goat because goat milk was said to be good for those who were ailing. She said in the room which is today our living room, she milked the goat. No doubt it was given to Juro to keep him healthy. Luka was very caring when it came to his brothers. Juro was left crippled from his accident at the railway station in Braddock. He may have developed an inferior complex about himself, as Luca never told us or led us to believe Juro, as tall and handsome as his picture showed, was a womanizer. Word got to Juro that some women arrived from the old country and he ought to go and meet them. One of the women was Milica Blažević, who had a brother here in America named Nikola Blažević. Milica's cousin, Ljuba Đipolo, was with her, and also Danica, whose maiden name escapes me now, but who eventually became Nikola Blažević's wife and later Juro Potkrajc's wife. Also there was a Croatian woman who was called Fanka, who came over on the boat with them. Ironically, it was Fanka's daughter in later years that married Richard Lucina, half-brother to Stana's son Ljuban. When Juro came to the house where Milica Blažević was staying, he told his family he looked over the bridal prospects and thought to himself, which of these women will I be able to eat a piece of bread in peace? His choice was little Milica Blažević, who was no striking beauty. Her cousin often taunted her all the way till her late years with the words, Juro would never have married you had he not been a cripple. Milica, of course, like any woman, felt degraded and sad that her cousin would talk to her in such a degrading way. Juro proposed and Milica accepted. Milica was under 5 feet height and Juro was 6'3", possibly even 6'4". The contrast was quite noticeable. One day Ljuban, Stana's son, was on the street and saw Milica coming to visit. He ran ahead and came into the house telling everyone, Juro's girlfriend is walking up the road. Boy, is she ugly. Of course, this brought laughter in the house from everyone, but it was not very nice. Milja had grown attached to Stana, and so did Luca become close in his relationship to Stana. To everyone's surprise, Stana was pregnant and carrying Luca's child. He longed to have a son. Milica and Juro were married on July 24, 1921. The reception was held in what today is the dining room of our home. Milica never forgot that day, and each time she came to our home, she would tell us that once upon a time this room served as the reception room for her wedding. It is amazing to know how one house with 3 bedrooms was able to be home for so many back then. On September 16, 1921, Stana gave Luca his long-cherished wish, a son. Luca said when he took his son in his arms, he felt as though God gave him the world to have and to hold. Milja was 1 month from her 4th birthday. Luca chose Petar Malic to baptize his son Juro. But he said at first he named Juro after his brother Juro, but later in life he would tell us that George was named after President George Washington. Chicha Ljuban was boarding with his 2 brothers, and one day he saw that Milja had soiled the floor in the kitchen. He got a little ornery and went outdoors and found a feather. He came back inside and placed the feather in the dunk. Stana happened to be out in the yard and he went out on the porch and called out, "O Stana, evo žandar doša." "O Stana, policeman is up here." Stana got somewhat frightened, and when she came into the room and saw the feather in the dunk, she said Ljuban was beside himself laughing loudly. She said she laughed at this prank, but then yelled at him for scaring her with the thought that a policeman had really come up looking for her, and she wondering why. Milja nicknamed Ljuban Bibi. Perhaps she was unable to say Ljuban and it came out Bibi. Anyhow, the name stuck to him. Strina Milca became pregnant, and 9 months after she was married, on April 29, 1922, she gave birth to a girl who they named Maria. Petar Novakovic was cum for Maria when she was baptized, and they used Petar Novakovic thereafter for all their children's baptisms. Mother Stana also became pregnant, and on November 22nd, 1922, she gave birth to another son. He was born the day after St. Archangel Michael, and they both agreed he should be named after St. Archangel Michael. And they called him Mikey all the time. Said later in life that Mikey was the one who looked most like him. Luca loved both his sons and was as proud of one as the other. Juro, the eldest, became somewhat jealous of his brother. The two were only 14 months apart in age. Sometimes Stana would hold Mikey, and Juro would become jealous and tell her, "Put him down and hold me." And he would tell her, "If you don't put him down, I will jag his eyes out." Of course, he never tried that, but it was his way of calling attention to himself. Who can blame him for his jealousy, as he was still quite a baby himself? Luca said he would come home from his job on the railroad, and Mikey would know that he always went to the built-in china we once had in our dining room. Luca kept a bottle of whiskey in one of the cupboards down below, and Mikey would run over to that cupboard and utter "ah," because when Luca drank his shot of whiskey, he would always say "ah." Luca would get teary-eyed when he looked back at those days because Mikey became very ill. Dr. Beswick said on Mikey's death certificate that he died of tubercular meningitis on February 8, 1924 at 6:40 p.m. Dad said on the visit he made, he took a match and waved it in front of his open eyes, but Mikey never blinked. Chicha Juro was standing next to Dr. Beswick, and he looked over to him and said, "Doctor, I think we are going to lose him." And Dr. Beswick looked back and said, "George, this boy is going to grow up to be big and strong as you." Luca said Mikey lay in a comatose way, never blinked his eye or made a movement with his body until the evening. Then he said his whole body suddenly shook with a tremor, and that's when he died. Luca and Stana's heart was broken when he died. They called the undertaker, but Luca didn't let Mikey be embalmed, and they laid his little body in the casket the undertaker brought. And Luca said he had a handkerchief tied to his head and chin to keep his mouth closed. He said they had to keep an eye on that handkerchief because there was a woman who they believed was into some kind of witchcraft, and they said they feared she would steal the handkerchief. That woman's identity was hidden from us. Mikey was only 14 months and 17 days old when he died. Nelia was only 6 years and 5 months old when Mikey died, and she said it was very sad in our home. Mother's mother, Kata Drakulic, was still living in the old country. Luca would send her money now and then, and Stana wrote to her and told her Mikey's death broke her heart. Kata wrote back and told her to not be so mournful and sad as it was to lose a child. She had a good mate and other children who needed her. Except for this statement, not too much information was given to us about our grandmother's life, except for these words she wrote to Stana. This is somewhat disheartening because our grandmother died in 1925, and this is all that we learned about her life abroad while Stana was here in America. Chicha Juro and Strina Milca longed for a son, and a couple of months after Maria was born and Mikey was still living, they announced Milca was expecting. And on August 18, 1923, she delivered a son, and they named him Petar. They named him Petar after his cum, Petar Novakovic. Father Luca, we think, was shocked and felt somewhat slighted that Juro didn't name their son Luca, because he named his son after Chicha Juro, but later went and said that he named him after President George Washington. It was only a few months after Pete was born that Chicha and Strina announced she was pregnant again. on August